Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the November 3rd Board of Zoning Appeals meeting. My name is Luke Mortensen. With me tonight in the City Commission room is Catherine Week, liaison to the Board of Zoning Appeals. We will work alongside the chair to facilitate tonight's meeting's proceedings. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast live on the city's YouTube channel and public access cable channel 25.
Tracy.
During the meeting,
Sorry, she was there.
During the meeting, please mute yourself when not actively speaking. Please keep your video on for the duration of the meeting. There will not be screen sharing as a part of the meeting this evening. All attachments, reference materials, and submissions from the public are included in the agenda packet. The chair will call for in-person and virtual public comment for those who wish to speak. All motions will need to be stated clearly. After a motion is made and seconded, staff will call on each board member individually to provide their vote. Staff will then need to announce whether the motion carried and the count of the vote. At this time, I'll toss it to Catherine for a quorum call.
Good evening, board members. Catherine Week, staff liaison. Before we do roll call, I would just like to introduce, we have two additional new board members with us this evening. Tracy Matthews and Dean Palos have joined the board. So we'll have two new members with us this evening, and we're happy to have them join a board. So I'm going to go ahead and read roll to make sure that we have quorum for the evening, and then we'll get started. Hill?
Here.
Harrod? Rankin? Shalinsky?
Here.
Swearingen?
Here.
Matthews?
Here.
Palos?
Here.
And we do have quorum. Thank you. And we'll throw it back to the chair to get us going down the agenda.
All right, welcome everyone, and welcome to the new board members. I am happy to be serving with you. First item is communications. To acknowledge any communications to come before the board. Are there any?
This is staff liaison Catherine Week. We do not have any additional communications. There was an update to your packet this morning, and that had additional communications in the update.
Thank you. I would ask the board members, does anyone need to disclose any ex parte communications and or abstentions for specific agenda items? Okay, I don't hear anything there. Finally, announcing any agenda items that are to be deferred, and apparently there was a second agenda item that has been withdrawn. Is that correct?
Staff liaison Catherine Week. That is correct. No deferrals, but we had one withdrawal prior to the posting of the packet, so it's visible on your agenda that it was withdrawn.
Okay, very good. So there is one public hearing item to come before the board tonight. This is a request for variance. It is B-22-00307. And this is with regard to the Turn Hall property at 900 Rhode Island Street, submitted by Patrick Watkins on behalf of the property owner of record. As I understand it, this variance has three different parts to it. One would reduce the rear setback from 12 feet to 0 feet, which would have the effect of increasing the impervious lot cover beyond the 80%, which is normally allowable, to 81.8% of the lot. And so that would be the second aspect of the variance. And finally, there is a request to reduce the required parking spaces for the proposed use from 152 spaces to 28 spaces. So if I have that correct, I would like to call upon the staff now to give the staff report.
Good evening, board members. Luke Mortensen, planner with Planning and Development Services Department. As Chair Shalinski noted, public hearing item number 1 is a multi-part variance request from the off-street parking standards as found in Article 9 and the density and dimensional standards as found in Article 6 of the Land Development Code. The specific request is to reduce the required off-street parking amount from 152 spaces to 28 spaces, to reduce the required rear setback for a structure in the commercial strip district from 12 feet to 0 feet, and to increase the maximum impervious lot coverage amount for a CS district lot from 80% to 81.8% for a proposed mixed-use redevelopment located at 900 Rhode Island Street. I'll now briefly run through the 5 review criteria, and I'll do my best to discuss the variances separately if the analysis differs. Criteria 1 focuses on unique conditions based in plating or zoning. This variance originates from the applicant's desire to establish a mixed quality restaurant and event center use redevelopment within the existing Turnholla structure. Physical improvements, including a building addition, are proposed for the existing building currently addressed as 900 Rhode Island Street. Staff believes that the subject property has unique conditions based in its plating and zoning. The subject property is a platted Lawrence original town site lot with the standard 50 feet by 117 feet dimensions seen across much of downtown and East Lawrence. The subject property's commercial strip zoning designation expands the list of permitted uses. However, its lot area and dimensions are more similar to the residentially zoned lots to the north and south. The CS district is generally, but not exclusively, geared towards auto-oriented land uses along the city's major arterials like West 6th Street, 23rd Street, and Iowa Street, rather than core neighborhoods like the border between downtown and East Lawrence. To conclude this first section, staff believes that the subject property's commercial strip zoning designation, its platted dimensions, and the size and position of the existing legally non-conforming Turnholla structure may constitute a unique condition. This analysis applies to the off-street parking, the rear setback, and the maximum impervious surface variance components. Criteria number 2 focuses on the potential adverse effects upon the rights of adjacent property owners or residents. In staff's opinion, the requested variance would not adversely affect the rights of adjacent property owners or residents. Reducing the required off-street parking amount, reducing the required rear setback, and increasing the maximum amount of impervious surface coverage would not restrict adjacent properties from continued operation of their existing land uses. Neighbor notice to property owners and neighborhood organizations within 400 feet was provided. Communications are included in the agenda packet. Criteria number 3 focuses on unnecessary hardship as defined by Article 17 of the Land Development Code. Staff believes that requiring the applicant to comply with the code required off-street parking, rear setback, and maximum impervious surface coverage standards could be considered an unnecessary hardship. The proposed rear setback and maximum impervious surface coverage request would allow for the continued redevelopment of this existing Turnholla structure and would house modern building code compliant features such as ADA ingress and egress points, an elevator, and access to the ADA restroom facilities. Additionally, regardless of the proposed land use, any applicant would likely be restricted to operating within only a portion of the Turnhallis structure if the amount of usable space were limited to its on-site parking capability. Even without a building addition, there are few permitted land uses that could operate within the entire Turnhallis structure while providing sufficient code-compliant parking on-site. Criteria number 4 focuses on adverse effects on the public health, safety, morals, order, convenience, prosperity, or general welfare. In staff's opinion, granting the proposed rear setback and maximum impervious surface coverage variance would not adversely affect the above listed items. Staff has received adequate assurance from the city's Municipal Services and Operations Department that these proposed variance requests would not adversely impact the adjacent sanitary sewer, storm sewer, or public rights of way. Alternatively, staff does believe that the proposed parking reduction could constitute an inconvenience to adjacent property owners and residents. It is reasonable to expect that both the proposed quality restaurant and event center uses may operate at the same time, at least on certain days or nights of the week. Even if both uses are operating below full capacity, there could be a significant increase of on-street parking near the subject property. Property owners and residents are not legally entitled to the immediately adjacent street parking, and it remains lawful for drivers to park in the public right-of-way where permitted. However, the impact of an increased on-street parking serving the proposed Turnhallis development would be realized likely most heavily on the adjacent public rights-of-way between New Hampshire and Connecticut streets. And finally, criteria number 5 focuses on the general spirit and intent of the Land Development Code. Staff believes the proposed rear setback and maximum impervious surface variances are generally in line with the spirit and intent of the code. Alternatively, staff does not believe that proposed parking variance, as requested, fully aligns with the spirit and intent of the code. The physical and social characteristics of the subject property and the surrounding neighborhoods, the adjacency to city-owned and operated parking areas, identified city goals to reduce and consolidate off-street parking, and an ongoing citywide land development code rewrite and East Lawrence specific neighborhood planning effort suggest that a reduction of required parking could align with the spirit and intent of the code and could be supported. However, a reduction of 124 spaces as proposed goes beyond the intent of the variance process as expressed by Article 13 of the Land Development Code. To conclude, staff has made 2 separate recommendations, and I'll state them accordingly. First, staff recommends approval of the variance request to reduce the required rear setback for a structure in the CS Commercial Strip District from 12 feet to 0 feet, and to increase the maximum impervious lot coverage amount from 80% of the lot to 81.8% of the lot. Second, staff recommends denial of the parking variance request to reduce the required off-street parking spaces from 152 spaces to 28 spaces. With that, I'll wrap up and can stand for questions, and our applicants are with us tonight as well.
All right, thank you, Luke. Do any board members have any questions for the staff? Okay, I have one, and I have not formed it very well. There is a whole bunch of parking data that is included in the packet, like hundreds of pages of it, apparently. So I will be the first to readily admit I did not read all of it. And I'm not convinced of the relevance of all of it. because it appears to me that some of this data is for lots that are blocks and blocks away from the site. And I'm not sure that anyone is going to try to park 4 or 5 blocks away from the site. So I think what's relevant to me is something close to the site, which would be the parking garage in the 1000 block of New Hampshire Street. So I'm wondering if you could summarize what that data says and how it plays into your findings.
Yeah, we were provided that data from the city's parking services manager, and we focused mostly on the New Hampshire Street parking garage and surface lot 8 on at 824 New Hampshire Street, and surface lot 4 at 825 New Hampshire Street. And you're right, there is a lot of data there, and we mostly looked at during the evening hours what the capacity levels were. And it's a little bit difficult to give you an exact number because they were listed out hourly for each of those lots. But the capacity was on most nights of the week, there was between 40 and 30% available capacity in some of those lots. And so the thinking being, some of the off-street parking load could be handled by those city-owned and operated lots within the neighborhood. And that the neighborhood, that those lots had some capacity for them. Now, those lots have different hours, or different levels of hours. Some are 2-hour parking, some are more than that, some are surface, and some are in the garage. And so there is a difference there. But that data shows that those lots are not full completely for the entirety of what we anticipated these operating hours would be.
Okay. And do you have any sense of your report said that some level of variance would be reasonable, but not what was requested. And I'm trying to get a sense of what that number might be based on the data.
So we would hesitate to give any specific number. In the past for similar requests, we've never given an exact number of what we're looking for. We rely on the applicant to provide us what they're, a number, and we'll make an analysis based on that. We've generally not made a benchmark of what we would then approve versus disapprove.
Okay, thanks, Luke. Tressa, you had a question?
Yeah, I wanted to know, based on the history and the historical use of the building, how do we judge that? I mean, this hall was originally built to be a social hall. It had a theater in it. There were big events there, weddings there, parties there. There was a bowling alley in the basement. How do we balance how that building has been used over many, many decades with the new quote unquote proposed use of the building? I know I myself have attended many parties in that building with 250, 350 people present at those parties. So, and that's in my lifetime. How do we balance that? How do we judge that with this request that's coming forward before us tonight.
Do you want me to answer that?
Is that a question for the other board members or for staff?
For staff,
Okay. Yeah. So I think in the staff report, we kind of hit on that thought, that line of thinking that this has the historical use is one of a gathering space, of a community use. This is a good example of a property and a land use that has been around since before zoning and is being, regulated through the lens of a land development code that was adopted in 2006. And so that contradiction is exactly why we're here tonight.
I had one more question. The parking requirement, as I understand it, is based on the square footage of the facility as proposed in the expansion, and an occupancy, if we want to call it that, an occupancy level that is based on the square footage. Is that correct?
That's correct. The two uses have separate parking requirements and parking standards, correct?
So my question would be, is it possible that an applicant could agree to a occupancy limit that is lower than the square footage might indicate, and then have a corresponding decrease in the parking requirement?
Do you want me to answer? Staff Liaison Catherine Week. So we have, there have been special use permits within the city that have been structured in that regard, where the occupancy limit has been a special condition of the special use permit. The occupancy limit is not what you are being asked to address in this particular ask. That is a different standard and a different basically different code section, not what the variance is covering this evening. There are ways for the applicant to reduce their occupancy load, which could impact the number of parking that they're requesting. And I think where you may be going, and correct me if I'm wrong, one thing that you do have within your power is to condition variance. If you're approving a variance, types of conditions would be like contingent upon an approved site plan for the use on the property. And then with a compliant site plan, those things would be controlled or constrained within that site plan, and those parking limitations based on whatever square footage they're utilizing for different types of uses would conform to the site plan. And in that case, then the variance would be in effect if you've placed a condition contingent upon the site plan approval. That's one route. The occupancy, as I mentioned, is really something that would be addressed under a special use permit, a different process, not under the variance process.
All right, thanks, Catherine. Any other questions from board members? All right. We would like to hear from the applicant at this time.
Thank you, Board Member Shalinsky. My name is Patrick Watkins. I'm an attorney. I am here on behalf of Turn Hall LLC, which is the owner of record. With me is Mike Myers. He is an architect with Hernley and Associates. Both Mike and I are East Lawrence residents. And I think we're both happy to be here tonight, in part because we've been able to see the evolution of this project over the past 10 years or so. It's a remarkable story, and I'll try and cut through it really quick. I'm going to start my timer so I don't go over. But I want to answer a couple questions that I've heard before I dive into the history here. And Tressa, I think, or Commissioner, Board Member Hill, I think you asked a great question. Why are we here? From our perspective, we're here because the code is inflexible, and the only relief that the staff has directed us to seek and receive is from your board. Your board can grant us the ability to move forward with the rehabilitation of this project, but the code does not allow us to. The code calls for a whole bunch of parking, which we cannot provide. And so it is your board that has the authority to solve this problem. And Board Member Shelinski, I think you have a good question too. Is there ways that we can adjust? And I think there may be some ways to adjust, but I have some deep concerns about that, and I'll talk about that. But what you're really talking about is a large parking variance being reduced to a slightly smaller large variance. And I'm not sure that the juice is worth the squeeze on something like that. It certainly adds another condition which limits and frustrates the feasibility of a project like this. But I want to explain a little bit about how we got here. You may have seen the letter from the Lawrence Preservation Alliance it's at the end of the packet. And if you made it all the way through that parking study, congratulations. But at the end is some communications. And the Preservation Alliance letter is something that's worth reading. But this building was rescued. It was at the brink of destruction 10 years ago. And it was the efforts of a volunteer board that saved it, the Lawrence Preservation Alliance. They recognized the historical importance of the Turnholla, and they took action. Remarkably, they raised the money from LPA membership to purchase the building in 2012. They received a grant from the Heritage Council to replace the roof and stabilize the building. And they placed a historic protective covenant on the building. And I've heard this more than once, but I've heard it from Stan Hernley, which means it's true in my mind. It's a miracle that this building is still standing. And I want to reiterate it. This is a remarkable preservation story. Since the time of those actions in 2012 and 14, the LPA has been preparing and waiting for a developer to take a risk on the rehabilitation, to try and take that risk to breathe new life into this building, which needs it. And it's taken time to find a developer. It's the better part of 8 years that we've been waiting for someone to come forward. And to be clear, this is a significant risk that's being taken here. It's a type of risk it would be difficult to really fully comprehend. Restacking 150-year-old rock walls, reinforcing 3-story masonry, restoring balconies and basements, managing a rehab that meets a very high level of preservation requirement, but also adds a modern addition. Repurposing a building that has not had an appropriate user in decades. The current owners are not the only developers who have tried, but they're the only ones that have gotten this far. And they're the only ones that have started. And we have a chance. This owner is willing to take a multi-million-dollar risk on this property, on this preservation dream. And the windows, if you drove by it, are being worked on this week, which is especially exciting for those of us that have been watching it. Plans are being finalized on the structure. The Historic Resource Commission has approved the design. The State Historic Preservation Office and the National Parks Service have been informed with preliminary paperwork about this rehabilitation. Construction is planned for next year. But this is not a project to attempt to create a museum. It's not going to be a sculpture. It's not going to be an artifact placed in the middle of a neighborhood. This building requires a functional use. It requires an economically feasible use to match the substantial investment that's going into the building. And the analysis on use is important, but it's not difficult to understand. First, with the preservation requirements on the building, we had to preserve the stage in the gallery and the balcony, and the uses upstairs are predetermined. It must be an event center of some sort. For movies, music, cultural events, wedding ceremonies, neighborhood events, it was like it was designed 150 years ago. There's not really any realistic alternatives to an event center from my perspective. Office and residential have been considered, but those uses we know are inferior from a preservation perspective. And we know that event space is relatively limited in its activities required at the site. It requires an event planner and coordination, bookings. It largely relies on weekend activity. and events that are limited in hours of operation. But second, in contrast to the main floor, the basement offers some flexibility for preservation, perspective, and use. The secondary area, we know, do not have as many character defining areas in the basement to work around. And we know that the basement uses cannot conflict or obstruct or frustrate the main floor event activity, which is the primary revenue center for the building. If there's a wedding or an event on the first floor, use on the basement shouldn't be able to disrupt that. So that was sort of the first requirement with regard to the basement. But we also know the basement should support and be available for collaboration on the main floor, should the events require it. So there's bathrooms in the basement that could be used if needed. We know there's a catering kitchen that we're planning to put in that could provide dining opportunities for the main floor. We know that the basement can act as a staging space. But perhaps most importantly is the flexibility to use the basement for some sort of more stable, separate income-producing activity. Quality Restaurant allows an operator to utilize the space in the kitchen independently of the first floor, but also collaboratively, if needed. It would allow the building to have revenue potential on more than just weekends. And I can't overstate the importance of this dynamic for the feasibility of the project to allow multiple uses, steady income for a massive investment. These two uses will seldomly be used to the fullest extent at the exact same time. You can imagine trying to hold a wedding at the same time you have a restaurant and full activity downstairs. You can imagine trying to have a movie or a concert on the main floor. It doesn't work if you have two uses at full time in both spaces. Uniquely, the parking lot across the street that's been reserved for this lot can serve the regular everyday uses of the restaurant. It's the event center. It's the historic use on the main floor with the massive parking burden that we're asking for accommodation here that requires this variance. The staff report has a couple of unfortunate conclusions in our opinion, and we understand that staff is limited in some respects in what it can recommend to your board. But thankfully, that's why we have this board, and staff merely recommends. It is the BZA that has the authority to resolve this issue. Staff supports the permeable surface and the setback, so I won't burden the discussion about those. And staff supports the parking variance on 3 of the 5 elements. But staff suggests that the required parking load on the street is inconvenient. And the staff notes that the massive parking variance will certainly be necessary, but that a reduction of this amount is beyond the code, intention of the code. Staff specifically notes they don't know where additional parking could come from, but they suggest that the applicant should try harder to find it. With regard to the staff's comment that the parking arrangements are inconvenient, I think we would agree that there are really some significant inconveniences about developing a 150-year-old building. You've heard about the LPA history, and you've heard a little bit about what it's going to take to rehab this building. And you've heard that under every circumstance, this building is going to require a significant parking variance. In this case, there are all sorts of competing interests. The massive planning efforts that go into the process of preserving buildings like the Turn Hall are remarkable. The efforts by the LPA and the Heritage Council are unprecedented. And the risks associated with the rehabilitation are unable to be fully comprehended or calculated, suggesting that the parking of all issues is too much of an inconvenience at this time really minimizes and deflates all of the remarkable inconveniences that this property has really been through. We disagree that with the staff's interpretation of the intention of the code. The intention of the code in our perspective is to provide a process for development and the needed relief in exceptional circumstances. There's no better example of exceptional circumstances than this building in Lawrence. It's adjacent to the downtown commercial district, which has over 3,000 parking spaces. It does not receive the benefit of the parking accommodation just to properties just to the west of it. There are 2 parking lots within a block, surface parking lots, and a large garage just a little bit over a block. And I went to an event at Miscellaneous on Wednesday morning, easily able to accommodate the parking demand from that event through the garage and through the surface lots. I go to the farmers markets, which is right across the street. It uses the surface lots that this property would be able to use, and it's easily able to accommodate the parking load. there's no other available parking lots that could serve the Turnholla. And I can personally assure you that none of the other private property owners are going to be willing to burden their properties with a code compliant off-site parking agreement. This project should be a celebration of planning and community-minded preservation efforts. It's not an exaggeration to say that this project will be one of the city's best preservation achievements. We have a developer that's prepared to take incalculable risks. We know that the code is inflexible with regard to parking and unfortunately inflates the amount of parking that we probably need here because our uses are collaborative. Parking lots in the nearby vicinity can adequately serve this, and those are fully capable of serving the day-to-day use. In reality, this is more about restoring a historic use. Can the Turnholla be allowed to be the Turnholla, a community event space that's never had to provide its own parking? We need your support to complete this planning process and to move to the next step. We're available for any sort of questions you might have. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Do any of the board members have any questions for the applicant? Tracy Matthews.
Yeah, you mentioned that there are parking lots across the street and parking a block over. Are those city parking lots or are those personal parking lots that belong to personal businesses? For example, you mentioned the farmers market and at the bank, and I'm pretty sure that the bank does not allow those who attend the farmers market to park in that lot. And so how would that be different for you, number one? And also, who do the other parking lots you're considering, who do they belong to if they don't belong to the city?
Sure. There's a couple of parking lot distinctions that we should be clear about. The parking lot directly across 9th Street is part of this application. It is controlled by the developer, and that is for the exclusive use of the Turnholla. The parking lots that I was referring to within a block are both city lots. City lots designed to carry the load of the downtown parking district. The parking garage is obviously city owned as well. There are some privately owned lots, though they're small. They serve primarily the properties to which they are attached. There's one owned by Tim Keller, Caddy Corner, but it's used by a range of users that use his office. And his office complex has been built into more of a co-working space recently. And so the hours of operation are broadened there. I would also say that to utilize some of these privately owned off-street parking lots in our application requires a code compliant parking agreement, which has a number of criteria that we don't think anybody would be willing to grant to us. So specifically, I'm talking about city parking lots.
Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, seeing no other questions at this time. This is a public hearing item. So now would be the time where we would hear from the public. Is there anyone from the public who would like to speak?
Yes, we have. We don't have anybody on Zoom, but we have a number of in-person comments, and we'll begin with them.
Great.
If you would come up to the podium, please.
Please state your name too. Yeah.
Okay. My name's Dennis Brown. Good evening, commissioners. I've been a board member of Lawrence Preservation Alliance for 22 years. I served as board president for 16 years. I'd like to address a few comments about the extraordinary efforts undertaken by Lawrence Preservation Alliance to secure the existing parking that was available to the Turnholla. And that was at a time when LPA didn't even own Turnholla. We owned it, like Pat said, from 2012 to 2014. We completed a $125,000 stabilization project there that I believe the building would not be there today if we had not done that. We sold it to an experienced developer, an experienced rehab developer in 2014. And we're hopeful that we would see a project happening the following year. That didn't happen. And by 2017, this developer was still not able to come up with a rehabilitation plan and end user partner that would get this project off the ground. At that time, we were noticing that the parking lot at 846 Rhode Island, directly across the street, it was 32 spaces, was in disuse. We knew all that time that it had been owned by U.S. Bank for their employees to park in. When the city built the parking garage on New Hampshire Street, that was closer for the bank employees, so they started parking there. We saw a real problem with the parking lot, which we knew Turn Hollow would desperately need, that if we were passive about that, we would wake up someday and find out it had been sold to a downtown developer who would put a building on it, and that option for parking at Turn Hollow would be removed. We went into, our board determined we were going to attempt to buy the parking lot. We went in to see the manager of the branch bank, Brad Burnside, talked with him about it, and he did confide in us that several developers were starting to talk with him about purchasing the lot, and we were like the third or fourth. So the bank home structure was realizing that they needed to set up a process to sell that property. We put in an offer. We got a counter offer from the bank. We accepted it. And over another period, this was in fall of 2017, over a period of a month or two, the bank determined, based on the community benefit portion of our offer, a non-for-profit trying to save a historic building, that we would be first in line for them to try to work out a deal. And of course, working with the bank corporate structure in Minneapolis, it was a smooth process, but a long one. It took 5 or 6 months. But we were able to buy that property. And the way we bought it was we combined 9 personal loans from LPA members to come up with the purchase price of that property. There was some interest on that. And of course, as a commercial property, there's a heavy tax load on that property. We leased the property to the developer, and that made us revenue neutral. And the new owner of Turn Hollow has assumed that lease. So now they're in that position, and there's a purchase option on the lease agreement that when a developer completes a substantial rehabilitation of the Turn Hollow and gets an occupancy permit, they can trigger that purchase option and buy the parking lot for the same price that LPA bought it. So what we did was step into a situation that was very dangerous for Turn Hollow, froze that property in time, and now we're at a point where, okay, folks, it's 2014 again, and you can buy the lot for that price. And, you know, that was the parking that was available that LPA was able to procure. And one interesting thing about this property purchase, in 38 years of the existence of the Lawrence Preservation Alliance, this parking lot is the most expensive property ever bought by LPA. It's kind of odd. A preservation group buying a parking lot, and that's our most expensive acquisition. But that it goes to the point of how strongly LPA has felt that this property needs to be preserved. And we have felt that way for 10 years, and our actions prove it.
Thank you. Other public comments?
Chairman Shalinski, my name is Mike Delaney. Dennis was the president of the LPA for 16 years. I've been the president for a couple of weeks, so I can't speak with the benefit of the experience that he has, but I signed the letter that's in your packet today, and I want to second a couple of the points that Mr. Watkins made in his presentation. This building is a real treasure for the city. And the community organizations, the LPA principal among them, helped to save this at a time when there was a substantial likelihood it has done everything it could, including helping to get other community resources, the county's Heritage Conservation Council grant to help support this activity until the appropriate angel would come along to be able to push a development through to conclusion. It appears that developer is in the picture at the moment, and the experience that LPA has had with the project to this point demonstrates that there are only a small range of options that are going to be available. This developer appears to have one. Those options don't involve developing the property in a way that will require less parking than this. Since you have the authority, you have the power to grant the variance that this property requires in order to be redeveloped. And we urge you to exercise that authority and grant the variance that has been requested. We appreciate the staff's support for the other two variances. We don't think that there's any controversy at all there, but the parking variance is critical, indispensable to the successful redevelopment of this project. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have one more, Barry.
Okay, great.
Thank you. My name is Angie Blair, and I have the property at 904 Rhode Island, which is directly south of the Turn Hall. And I was able to purchase my property from the Preservation Alliance, and I support this project completely. And I do not feel that parking can and should be a concern. The building does need to be saved and salvaged for use, and there will need to be people in the building. And the parking is not a concern for me as a neighbor. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Any other public comments?
No more in person, and then there are no Zoom comments.
Okay. Do any board members have any questions for any of the people that made comments? Okay. So at this time, I would entertain a motion to close the public hearing on this item.
I'll provide that motion.
Okay, thank you. Moved by Board Member Matthews. Is there a second? Looks like Board Member Hill raised her hand. All right. Staff, would you please call the roll?
Yeah, Staff Liaison Catherine Week. Hill,
Board Member Hill.
Shalinski,
Yes.
Swearingen,
Yes.
Matthews,
Are we voting? I'm sorry. Are we voting on the variance?
Just closing the public comment.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Palos?
Yes.
And that motion carries. Thank you.
Okay, so at this point, we will bring this before the board for any discussion. So is there any discussion that the board members would like to have?
So are we breaking this into 3 different variance requests, or are we going to vote on it all as one whole? How would you like to proceed?
That is one of the things that we can discuss, whether we should vote on this in separate sections.
Staff did split the 3. We split them into 2 groups. One was we recommended support for the density and dimensional, so the impervious surface and the setback, and then separately was the parking.
Okay. Well, I'll go for the easy one and make a motion that we approve staff's recommendation for the density and the impervious surface and approve the setback.
Okay, so there is a motion to approve the reduction of setback and increase the allowable impervious surface as per the applicant's request. Is there a second for that motion?
I'll second that motion.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on the motion with respect to the setback and the impervious surface? I'll ask one more time. Any discussion? Okay. Hearing no discussion on the motion, I will ask the staff to call the roll. And this is where we are actually voting on the variance, or at least on 2 out of 3 parts of the request.
Staff Liaison Catherine Week. Hill, sorry.
Approve.
Shalinski,
Yes.
Swearingen,
Yes.
Matthews,
Yes.
Palos.
Yes.
And that motion does carry. Thank you.
Okay. So we will bring it back to the board for discussion of parking. Is there any discussion on that issue?
I think it's important to take a look at the very end of the packet and look at the communications from the East Lawrence Neighborhood Association and a few residents who are very in favor of the rehabilitation of the building, but not so much of the reduced parking. And so I don't know how we, this being my first meeting, I'm not completely sure how we consider those, or we just consider them that they're there and we can discuss those.
Is that directed for staff or for the chair?
Whoever. I'm not sure.
It's only my second meeting, Tracy. I think it's
okay.
I'll let Barry take a stab at it unless he wants staff to suggest.
Well, I will just say that it is information that is there for us to consider. That, there are two neighbors and a neighborhood association. And also we did hear from one neighbor next door who had a differing opinion on that. So it's all information for us to consider. There was also a letter from an organization suggesting that they spoke with 57 people about this, but no information as to who those 57 people were or where they might live in relation to the project area. So again, all this is information and it's important, but we don't have a lot of detail for some of it. If staff has any comment?
Yeah, staff would just, take all of that information and utilize it in your discussions against the criteria if they do or don't impact those 5 criteria points that you're using to analyze. That's staff's recommendation. So.
Go ahead, Tressa.
Thank you. We know that the first 3 criteria are met and the staff agree with those 3. So it's really the last 2, I believe, that we need to focus on. And the 4th one being that the variance does not adversely affect the public health, safety, morals, order, convenience, welfare of the neighborhood. And I would say to that, this building has always been there for the neighborhood. Anybody currently living who owns a property in the neighborhood, especially close to this building, they had to have been aware that this was a potential event space that was used for a long time and would potentially be used again. So there are, as the city has indicated, multiple city lots close by, a city garage. There's the parking lot across the street that's being leased. There's street parking. It's by public transportation. It's walkable to the downtown for events. So I would say that for number 4, that it does meet the general welfare of the neighborhood and does not adversely impact the health, etc. And I think on number 5 that it does meet the intent, if not the specific intent, the general intent of what the city is trying to do overall. I mean, it meets the intent of preserving our downtown, of using space that's available. That's a lot of what's discussed. Utilizing what's present as much as possible instead of building new or etc. So I would say it meets the general spirit and intent.
Any other comments?
This is Dean. I'd like to comment.
Yeah.
I walked the site and did my own minimal research on the time required to get from the parking lots that have been discussed, the one on Vermont, the one on, or the two on Vermont and the parking garage. And I think I got my streets, not Vermont, New Hampshire, sorry. But anyway, none of those distances from the furthest point in the parking lots was more than 4 minutes to walk to the structure. And to me, that's more than reasonable. And as far as the inconvenience to the neighbors, I think they are already fairly well inconvenienced by the parking that's there throughout the day that I've observed from people who park there that work downtown, as well as the residents themselves. So I'm not sure anything is going to improve the parking situation on Rhode Island Street, at least. And I'd also like to say that parking standards for years, not just in Lawrence, but throughout the country, have somewhat dictated development. If you can't meet the parking requirement, you can't build often what you want to build. You have to change it to modify it to the parking requirements. And across the country, I know from my experience professionally that this is being questioned in lots of places. I'm in San Francisco right now, and I've talked with people that have said they're trying to get rid of their parking requirements pretty much throughout, and that's for the downtown area. Because it's recognizing the limits that it puts on development, as well as is there a need for it, and encouraging alternative uses of transit. So I agree with Tressa. I think what they're proposing does satisfy the requirements of 4 and 5. And I think I commend the Lawrence Preservation Alliance for all their efforts. And I'm hopeful that this project can go through. And in my mind, that it would be stopped, or any other project would be stopped because of a parking standard is frustrating. And lastly, I just want to say this. I think, and Catherine, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the downtown commercial district is only 63 feet away from this property.
Staff Liaison Catherine Week, that's correct. That's approximate 63
Right.
feet. Yeah.
So if it was 63 feet closer, the zoning district, we wouldn't be here. The requirement for parking off-street parking wouldn't even be considered. So those are my comments.
Okay. Any other comments?
I just wanted to say I appreciate both of your perspectives. Again, my only concern is what we're seeing from the folks that live there in those emails and letters that are at the end of the packet about the variance. That said, I guess another concern I have is, and this is a question too, especially if you're a Dean, I'm not sure if it sounds like you're into development or something. What happens when there's an event at the Granada and there's an event at this location and there's an event at Miscellaneous, and we have that kind of a parking conundrum? Do we have the capacity to be able to deal with that? I guess, does the downtown have the capacity to deal with that?
We do have other lots downtown, right? We have a series of lots down Vermont Street. And to Dean's point on the amount of time it took you to walk from the New Hampshire lots to walk from the Vermont lots is probably going to only add a couple of minutes.
We also now, I'm trying to look at the plans that were submitted. Oh, there we go. Never mind. They were huge on my screen. I was trying to figure out how many handicap accessible spots there were close to the building. So never mind.
I did some of my own exploration, not walking, but driving. And at about 5:30 this evening, and I know that a Thursday evening is not a Saturday night. In the 900 block of Rhode Island Street, I made a rough estimate that there were about 25 unused parking spots. In the 800 block of Rhode Island Street, there were about 4. In the 700 block of Rhode Island Street, there were about 4. Surface lots on New Hampshire, street parking on New Hampshire, forget it. It was pretty full. However, in the garage, there were a lot of spaces. I couldn't even, or I didn't take the time to count them all, but we're talking dozens and dozens and dozens. Tracy, that does not really go to your question.
I think it's frozen.
I think we lost Barry there for a second. We'll see if he comes back here in a minute. If anybody else has discussions, go ahead and continue while we wait.
Maybe he came back. I appreciate what the Lawrence Preservation has done. I think it's a great project. It'd be nice to see a nice event center down there. And I drove by the area and checked parking and just kind of looked to see how close you are. And everyone talks about not going downtown because of the parking, but we have, like you said, 3,000 spaces. There is parking. Just depends on how close you want to be to the front door. And I won't vote yet or anything because we haven't passed a motion, but I do think that sounds like there's ample ways to make the parking work. When I first saw this, I was kind of discouraged. That seemed like a big drop from 159 to ask for 28. I don't know if there's another number we can maybe work in with their reconfiguring of the parking lot. I'm not quite sure what the options are, but I don't want this project to go away because we can't figure out this parking. And that was just a statement. It wasn't really a question.
That's an interesting point too, though. I would agree. Sounds like an amazing project, and I would also not want it to go away because of parking. But if there is wiggle room with that, that would be encouraging.
And something Patrick said, he said that they're not probably going to be doing the event and the restaurant at the same time because it would make sense the way the layouts are. And then I know you have to have 1 spot per every employee. So if you have 10 employees, you have to have 10 spots for that. So a lot of the parking, and if the employees decided to park, let's say you make the employees park at a city lot, then that opens up 10 spots. So I feel like there's some creativity that can happen with that. I don't know if Barry's back yet.
He's joining.
Almost.
Back. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. I guess probably it was too much bandwidth trying to read the packet on one computer and Zoom on another one. So, okay. I'm back. I don't know what you all heard or didn't hear of what I said.
I think we lost you at Tracy, to your point, and that's where we lost you.
Okay. And so, yeah, to your point, if there are simultaneous events going on a Saturday night, then what I found tonight would obviously be a different situation. So, yes, it is a concern. And, you know, people are not going to walk from the Riverfront Mall. They're not going to walk from Vermont Street. That's just not what happens.
I think one of the things I brought up, Barry, while you were disconnected, I mean, a lot of people take Ubers downtown now. There's so many different ways of transportation. If you're going downtown for an event where people don't even drive, you take an Uber or get some type of transportation, which that's always an option too when we're looking at these numbers. Especially, I don't know what the draw is going to be for your event space, but the younger generation, the college people, the people who might be renting out the space, they're going to be more inclined to maybe not even have to drive or park. Okay.
I think that's a good point. And we are in a limbo land right now where, as Dean pointed out, philosophies about parking are changing in the planning world. And we don't really know what Lawrence is going to do with this in the code rewrites that are currently underway. So there's a lot to balance here.
You know, I was just in Amsterdam, and I would see, I was standing taking pictures of the parking lot where there were probably 200,000 bikes parked right then, on top of each other, even height of three bikes. It was incredible. On the street, you would see people riding their bikes. 50 bikes would pass you in a second. And there would be people with infants in the front, 1 and 2 year olds in the back, and it would be raining. I mean, I think we're going to be moving beyond, let's say, of having to have a car to go across the street, to go to the park or a store or to visit a friend. You know, the Woody Allen line of, the car is 10 or the place you want to go is 10 feet away. So get in the car and drive there.
I think that's a lovely point and a very idyllic point for our community. But the Uber, I wish it was that way, honestly. The way Europe works with public transportation and biking and all that is amazing. And I wish we could incorporate that more into our world. But I think that's at this point might be a bit unrealistic for this particular situation. But Crystal's point to Uber, I know quite a few people of my age and Crystal's age that we probably both know who do that on the regular and take an Uber downtown if they know they're going to be, at an event space such as that, or even downtown with dinner and drinks or something like that. They'll take an Uber. So I think that's actually a really excellent point as well.
Okay. Do we have other discussion? Is anyone ready to make a motion?
You're on mute.
Try again, Dean. Looks like you're off mute.
Yeah, I am. And I don't know, did Tressa make a motion already?
I'm waiting for you.
Oh, okay. Well, I make a motion to approve the third variance request for a reduction in the number of parking spaces required for the facility.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I think we've already thoroughly discussed this, but is there any further discussion? Okay, would staff please call the roll?
Staff Liaison Catherine Week. Hill,
Approve?
Shalinski,
No.
Swearingen,
Approve.
Matthews,
Approve.
Palos.
Approve.
And the motion carries 4-1.
All right, thanks everyone. And congratulations to the applicant. I think this is going to be a very, very exciting project.
Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.
Okay, I believe that the only thing that is left on our agenda is to approve a miscellaneous item, which is the BZA calendar for the next 12 plus months.
Yes, this is Staff Liaison Catherine Week. Hopefully you've taken a look at the calendar. There's not a lot of impact for you as board members. We're still doing the first Thursdays of the month, unless there's a weird month with like a holiday like 4th of July or something that may have bumped it. But there is a little bit of a difference for staff in that the submittal deadlines moved back like a week or so, just to give staff a little more time to review the applications as they come in. There was a very quick turnaround previously. They would be due the Friday after a BZA meeting for the next BZA meeting. And so that didn't give staff a whole lot of time. So that is really the only change in the format of the calendar. Otherwise, unless you all have some issues with any of the dates, you can discuss that and let us know.
So
One of the dates conflicts with Passover, but I will deal with it.
Can we change the meeting date?
No, I'll just have my Seder after the meeting is over. Hopefully, it won't be a long meeting that night. But thanks for asking.
So we will need a motion and a vote on the calendar. So when you guys get to that point,
I make a motion that we approve the 2023 meeting calendar.
I second it.
Okay. Moved by Swearingen and seconded by Hill. Would staff please call the roll?
yes, Staff Liaison Catherine Week. Hill,
Approve?
Shalinski,
Yes.
Swearingen,
Approved.
Matthews,
Approve.
Palos,
Approve.
and the motion carries 5-0.
Great.
The
Thank you.
The other miscellaneous items that we usually talk about at the very end of the meeting is whether or not we anticipate any applications for the upcoming meeting. And just to give you a heads up, we know we do have one for sure. So there will be at least an item on your agenda for next month.
All right, thank you. Again, I would like to welcome our new board members. You participated well and definitely have picked up what we do and how we look at things. And I think we got a great board, and I look forward to working with everyone.
Mary?
Yeah.
I just wanted to comment. I wanted to tell Tracy I'm not a developer.
Okay.
My past is I'm a retired planner for 44.
Okay.
That's my background.
Still kind of in that world a little bit though. So
Only in that.
yeah.
Dean definitely has some expertise on this stuff.
Great.
No question. All right. At this time, I would like to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And seconded.
All right. You two have a thing going here. Would staff please call the roll?
Yes. Hill,
Approve.
Shalinski,
Yes.
Swearingen,
Yes.
Matthews,
Yes.
Palos.
Yes.
I did not expect any no's on that. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Good
Have a
night.
good evening.
Right.